The story begins with the haunting reflection. Whenever a man and a woman who are not bound by marriage or family ties are left alone together, there is always a third presence, temptation itself, whispering like a shadow. This truth, though often spoken as a warning, became a devastating reality for the narrator. She recalls how a single night of isolation with a stranger did not merely alter the course of events, but reshaped the foundation of her life. What she once believed about people, about trust, and about her own strength was overturned. The world she thought she understood crumbled, leaving her to rebuild her sense of self from the fragments. That night was unlike any other. The rain hammered against the streets of Dubai with such force that the road itself seemed to disappear under sheets of water. The city, usually alive with lights and constant motion, looked blurred and unfamiliar, swallowed by the storm. Standing helpless outside her office, the narrator felt panic creep into her chest. Hours had passed, and not a single taxi driver had been willing to take her home. The weather was too violent, the roads too dangerous, and the lateness of the night discouraged even the most daring drivers. She tried again and again, waving at the rare cars that splashed past, but each driver shook his head. Anxiety pressed heavily upon her. She was stranded, soaked, and alone in a city where comfort was miles away. At last, in desperation, she scrolled through her phone and found the number of a taxi driver she had relied on before. He was a Muslim man named Shahid, someone she had often called whenever she needed transport. He was always punctual, always polite, and never once had he taken advantage of her friendliness or beauty. Even as she dialed, she doubted he would come. Who would abandon the comfort of a warm home to face a storm like this? But to her astonishment, his voice on the other end carried calm assurance. "Wait for 15 minutes," he said. "I am leaving right now." His words stunned her. She found herself staring into the rain, wondering why he would sacrifice his own peace for her. Nearly 20 minutes later, headlights appeared through the blur of rain. Shahid had arrived, drenched from his effort but steady at the wheel. Relief flooded her heart as she climbed into the car. Gratitude spilled from her lips as she thanked him, but he brushed it aside with humility, saying it was his duty to help. At that moment, she did not realize that this stormy ride home was not the end of her troubles, but the very beginning of a journey that would test her soul. The car crawled forward through the sheets of rain, its wipers struggling against the storm's relentless fury. Inside, the warmth of the heater clashed with the tension in her chest. She leaned back in the seat, closing her eyes for a few minutes, grateful simply to be moving toward home after so many hours of despair. When she opened them again, her gaze naturally drifted toward the driver. Shahid's hands gripped the wheel firmly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The intensity of his focus surprised her. Not once did he glance at her reflection in the rearview mirror. In a world where most men were quick to steal glances or take liberties, this restraint felt unusual, almost unsettling. Her mind kept circling the same thought: why had he come? In weather so treacherous, most drivers had outright refused. Even the smallest amount of risk had been too much for them. Yet this man had left the safety of his home to answer her call. There had been no bargaining, no discussion of extra fare, no hesitation. It seemed as though her safety mattered to him more than his own comfort. The question lingered stubbornly in her mind, and the more she thought about it, the more she studied the man behind the wheel. Shahid had always struck her as different. She had called him many times before whenever she needed to travel, sometimes for errands, sometimes simply because she enjoyed long drives through the city. His calm nature had always stood out. He spoke little, responded with brief answers, and never pried into her life. When others would ask questions, attempt conversation, or comment on her appearance, Shahid's silence had been a shield of sorts. That silence, which she had once considered dull, now seemed to speak of dignity. The storm worsened, doubling the time of their usual route. What should have been a 15-minute drive stretched into more than 35 grueling minutes. The roads were rivers, the trees bent under the force of gales, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Yet Shahid kept driving, steady and determined, until at last her apartment building came into sight. Relief washed over her as they stopped at the entrance. She paid him his fare with gratitude and watched him prepare to leave. But as he tried to start the car again, the engine sputtered, faltered, and refused to roar back to life. Outside, the storm raged louder, winds howling and rain pounding mercilessly. A sudden impulse rose within her, an impulse that would change the course of everything that followed. She turned back to him with a smile, calling out before he could try again. "Why don't you stay here tonight?" she said. "The storm is too strong, and your car isn't working. You'll be safer inside." It was an invitation spoken with concern, but destined to lead into a night she would never forget. For a moment, Shahid froze, his hand still resting on the ignition. Her words seemed to catch him off guard. Slowly, he turned his head and looked at her, not with the boldness of a man seizing opportunity, but with the hesitancy of someone weighing caution against necessity. His eyes, though lowered quickly, carried a silent question. "Who else lives in your apartment?" he asked softly. The unexpected query made her pause. Few men invited so directly by a woman late at night would bother asking such a thing. But she was alone, and she said so plainly. "No one else." "I live here by myself. It's just a small rented place." Her reassurance seemed to do little to ease his doubts. For several seconds he remained silent, as though considering whether to decline. Then, with a resigned nod, he turned off the engine, stepped out of the car, and followed her toward the building. The two of them entered the elevator in silence. The rain battered the glass windows of the lobby, a reminder of the storm still raging outside. As the elevator climbed floor after floor, the stillness between them grew heavier. She wondered what thoughts occupied his mind. Did he mistrust her? Did he suspect her motives? Or was he simply too polite to voice his discomfort? Whatever it was, he kept his composure, his gaze fixed firmly on the elevator doors, never once glancing at her. At last, they reached the 14th floor. She unlocked her apartment and invited him in. It was a modest space, one room, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom tucked in the corner. She gestured for him to sit on the chair near the heater while she busied herself with the locks and switches. The storm outside had seeped into the room with her, leaving her clothes drenched, clinging to her skin, her body shivering violently. She turned on the heater, and warmth quickly filled the compact space. Shahid, however, remained quiet, his eyes lowered, his hands clasped together. He sat upright, not leaning back into the chair, as if reminding himself to maintain a barrier between them. His stillness struck her as unusual. Most men in his place would have filled the silence with words or stolen glances, but not him. He seemed lost in thought, perhaps even uneasy at being there. Watching him like that stirred something deep inside her, a dangerous spark. She thought of her past, of the betrayal she had suffered, of the bitterness still festering within her heart, and as her eyes lingered on Shahid, an idea took shape, one that would test both his strength and her own shattered trust. As the heater warmed the room, she found herself drifting into the shadows of memory. Standing near the window, listening to the storm outside, her thoughts carried her back years to her teenage days in Gujarat, India. Those were the days when her life felt simple, when she believed beauty and affection could guarantee happiness. But those days also held the seeds of the pain that shaped her future. She was only 14 when she first noticed Salim, a boy in her class. Salim was different from others, friendly, helpful, and always respectful. He never mocked, never divided people by religion or background. Slowly, she grew fond of him. The kindness in his words and his willingness to help anyone in need touched her heart. Eventually, she confessed her feelings, and to her joy, Salim smiled and accepted. What began as a friendship blossomed into something deeper, something she thought would last forever. Months turned into years, and as she grew older, her attachment to him only strengthened. She believed Salim was her future, the one person she could trust above all else. She carried this belief through school and into college, building her world around him. Whenever she was troubled, she leaned on him. Whenever she was happy, he was the first person she wanted to share it with. To her, their bond felt unbreakable. But as she reached 17, reality disrupted her carefully built dreams. Her parents began discussing her marriage, and soon they announced a proposal. Their choice was her cousin Rakesh, a match they believed would keep the family ties strong. For her, however, the news struck like lightning. How could she accept someone else when her heart was already given away? Panic consumed her. She could not imagine a life without Salim. She rushed to him the very next day, desperate for answers. Meeting him outside the college, she pleaded with him to take their relationship seriously. "My family wants me to marry Rakesh," she told him. "If you love me, this is the time to prove it. Speak to your parents, come to my home with a proposal, show them that we belong together." She looked at him with hope, believing he would finally rise to the occasion. For years, she had trusted his words, and now she needed his actions. This was the moment she thought he would protect their bond. But instead of reassurance, what she saw in Salim's face was hesitation. And what he said next would crush every expectation she had built around him. Her heart pounded as she waited for Salim's response. This was the moment that would decide the course of her future. She expected him to speak with certainty, to say that he would stand by her no matter the cost. Instead, his words fell like stones on her chest. Salim told her not to worry about marriage, as if it were unnecessary. He suggested that their bond was strong enough as it was, and there was no need to make it official. To him, what they already shared was enough. For a few seconds, she could not believe what she was hearing. All the years she had trusted him, all the hope she had built in silence, suddenly felt like illusions. "What do you mean there is no need?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I believed you would protect me. I thought you wanted a future with me." Salim gave a smile that chilled her. He told her she could go ahead with her family's decision, marry Rakesh, and still continue to see him in secret. His words struck her like a betrayal, far worse than silence. He was not willing to take responsibility, not willing to stand in front of the world for her. In that moment, she realized that all along, his promises had been fragile and self-serving. A storm of emotions raged inside her. Shock, anger, and heartbreak collided until she could no longer contain them. In frustration, she pushed him away, demanding that he stop speaking so casually about her future. She told him that if he truly loved her, he had to prove it openly. Otherwise, everything they had shared was meaningless. Her defiance seemed to wound his pride. His expression hardened, and suddenly he no longer looked like the kind, gentle boy she had fallen for years ago. He reminded her of how much time they had spent together, and then, with a coldness she had never seen before, he hinted at holding power over her. He told her that if she walked away, he would make her life difficult, that he had ways to ensure she could not ignore him. The girl who had once been so proud, so certain of her own choices, felt her entire world collapse in that instant. She had built her dreams on sand, and the waves had washed them away. Leaving that meeting, her steps were unsteady, her eyes blurred with tears. She realized she could no longer see Salim the same way. The boy she had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger whose true nature had been hidden all along. The days that followed were some of the hardest she had ever known. She shut herself in her room, refusing to eat or speak. Her mind kept replaying the moment when Salim had revealed his true face. The boy she thought would fight for her, who she believed would one day protect her honor and stand before her family with pride, had turned out to be a coward. Worse, he had spoken of her life as though it were a game, something to be manipulated according to his own desires. Salim did not stop there. He began calling her repeatedly, his voice no longer gentle but demanding. He pressured her to keep meeting him as though nothing had changed. Each call tore at her nerves. She knew now that his intentions were selfish, that he saw her not as a partner but as someone to control. The constant harassment left her restless, unable to sleep, unable to think clearly. In her desperation, she turned to her father. She could not tell him the truth, for the shame would have been unbearable, but she begged him to send her away from Gujarat. Her father, surprised by her sudden plea, pressed her for answers. Why did she want to leave her home so urgently? Why was she so shaken? Unable to reveal her secret, she invented a story. She told him she had witnessed something dangerous in the streets, something that made her fear for her life. In India, such fears were not uncommon, and her father, terrified at the thought of losing his only daughter, decided not to take any chances. Within days, arrangements were made. A family friend in Dubai was contacted, and the decision was sealed. She would leave India and start over abroad. The night before her departure, she sat in silence, staring at the ceiling of her room. Salim's betrayal had scarred her deeply. She had loved him with the innocence of youth, trusted him more than her own blood, and in return he had broken her spirit. Now she carried not just heartbreak, but bitterness. The hurt twisted itself into resentment, not only toward Salim, but toward the faith he represented. Her pain made her believe that his flaws were shared by all who resembled him. When she boarded the plane to Dubai, she told herself she was leaving behind not just her home, but her past. She was determined to rebuild her life in a place where Salim's shadow could not reach her. Yet, though the distance grew, the wound he left in her heart traveled with her, shaping the way she would view others in the years to come. Life in Dubai began quietly. At first, she felt lost in a foreign city, surrounded by tall buildings and unfamiliar streets. Yet she soon found work, rented a modest apartment, and slowly began building a new routine. On the surface, everything seemed stable. She went to work each morning, returned home in the evening, and tried to keep herself occupied on weekends. But inside, she carried wounds that had not healed. Salim's betrayal had planted a seed of bitterness deep in her heart. Whenever she thought of him, anger welled up. She had given him years of her life only to learn that his promises were hollow. To her, he had come to represent deception itself. That bitterness grew into something more dangerous: prejudice. She began to believe that all men like him were the same, that their words could not be trusted, that their faith was merely a shield behind which selfishness thrived. It was easier to blame an entire community than to face the painful truth that she had chosen the wrong person to trust. Then, one ordinary day, she crossed paths with someone who challenged those beliefs. She hailed a taxi and met Shahid, a driver from Pakistan. He was unlike anyone she had dealt with before. From the very first ride, she noticed his quiet dignity. While others often tried to start conversations, Shahid remained focused on the road. He answered questions politely but briefly, never prying, never crossing boundaries. His manner was so reserved that at first she thought him cold. But the more she traveled with him, the more she realized his silence was not rudeness but respect. There was something else about him, too. She was a striking woman, used to being noticed wherever she went. In Dubai, she had adopted a more modern lifestyle, her appearance turning heads often. Yet Shahid never looked at her with wandering eyes. Not once did she catch him staring in the mirror or trying to impress her. He seemed to carry a quiet shield, as though guarding himself from temptation. This restraint unsettled her at first, then intrigued her deeply. Over time, she began calling him whenever she needed a ride. His reliability became a comfort, his honesty a rare treasure. She learned small details about his life, that he had been in Dubai for 4 years, that his family lived back in Pakistan, and that he worked long hours to support them. Gradually, she realized Shahid was nothing like the man who had betrayed her in Gujarat. Yet the scars inside her whispered warnings. Could she ever truly trust again? Or was Shahid simply another illusion waiting to collapse? One evening, as heavy rain swept across Dubai, she found herself stranded outside her office. The streets were flooded and no taxis were willing to take the risk of driving through the storm. She waited for over 2 hours, growing increasingly desperate. At last, she called Shahid, uncertain whether he would come. To her surprise, his voice was calm and steady. "Wait for me," he said. "I'll be there soon." True to his word, he arrived, soaked from the rain but composed. She felt an unfamiliar warmth at his reliability. It struck her that Shahid had left the comfort of his home simply because she needed help. Unlike others she had known, he expected nothing in return. When she thanked him, he responded only with humility, saying it was his duty to assist someone in need. The drive home was long and slow, the wipers barely keeping up with the downpour. She studied him in the dim light of the car, wondering what motivated such quiet decency. By the time they reached her apartment building, the rain had worsened. She paid him and prepared to leave, but then noticed his car struggling to start again. Concern flickered in her heart, and before she could stop herself, she invited him upstairs to wait out the storm. Shahid hesitated. His eyes, usually lowered, lifted just enough to show uncertainty. "Who else lives with you?" he asked softly. When she admitted she lived alone, his hesitation grew. Yet after another moment, he agreed, stepping carefully into the building as though unsure if he should. Inside, the apartment felt warmer and safer than the storm outside. She offered him a seat and switched on the heater. Her own clothes were drenched, and she excused herself to change. As she returned, she noticed Shahid sitting still, his gaze fixed on the floor, lost in thought. And in that quiet moment, her heart grew restless. Memories of Salim surged through her mind, his betrayal, his manipulation, the way he had twisted her trust. A dangerous thought entered her. What if she could take revenge, not on Salim directly, but on someone who reminded her of him? To her eyes, Shahid's face seemed to overlap with Salim's, even though the two men were nothing alike. A storm brewed inside her, stronger than the one outside. She wanted to test him, to prove that all men were the same, that Dignity was just a mask. But deep down, another part of her hoped Shahid would be different, that he would rise above the shadows Salim had left behind. The silence between them grew heavier as the rain battered the windows. She felt torn between two powerful forces inside her: the bitterness Salim had planted in her heart and the faint hope that Shahid might prove that not everyone was the same. To test him, she did something reckless. She tried to draw his attention, hoping he would stumble, hoping he would confirm her belief that all men were weak when faced with temptation. But Shahid's reaction stunned her. The moment he realized her intention, he turned away sharply, lowering his gaze. His voice, though calm, carried firmness. "Please don't do this," he said quietly. "It is wrong. For me, faith is not just words. It guides every step I take. Better you ask me to leave than see me compromise what I believe." She froze. No one had ever spoken to her in that way before. Salim had used words of love to disguise selfishness, while Shahid used words of faith to protect both himself and her. The contrast hit her like lightning. Here was a man who had every chance to take advantage, yet instead he spoke of responsibility, of self-control, of right and wrong. Her eyes stung with unexpected tears. "Look at me once," she whispered bitterly. "You won't be able to resist." But Shahid shook his head. "Even to look wrongly is a sin. I cannot betray my faith or my family's trust by dishonoring a woman, no matter who she is." His voice softened. "If you truly want me in your life, there is only one path: marriage. Without it, there is no respect, no dignity." Those words pierced her heart. Marriage, responsibility, respect. They were the very things Salim had refused her, the things she had longed for but had never been given. Suddenly, the entire weight of her past crashed over her, how she had given her heart so freely, only to be treated like an afterthought. And now, standing before her, was someone who asked for nothing except the honor of commitment. Shahid rose from his seat, placed a shawl gently over her shoulders, and said, "Protect yourself. Don't let pain turn you into someone you are not." With that, he walked out into the storm, leaving her stunned. She collapsed onto the bed, trembling. The man she had tried to trap had instead covered her in dignity. For the first time in years, she saw clearly, not all people were the same. Where one man had betrayed, another had stood firm. Morning came with soft light streaming through the curtains, and the storm had finally eased. She stirred from restless sleep, still wrapped in the shawl Shahid had left on her shoulders. The memory of the previous night lingered, echoing louder than the thunder that had shaken the city. She had tried to expose him, to prove her bitterness true, yet he had left her with nothing but dignity. Curiosity drew her to the window. Down below, parked near the entrance, Shahid's taxi still stood, its surface beaded with raindrops. He had not driven away, but had spent the night inside his car. Her breath caught. All night, while she wrestled with her turmoil, he had chosen discomfort over stepping into temptation. The sight broke down the last of her defenses. She hurried down the stairs, her heart racing. As she approached, she saw him sitting with his eyes closed, weary but calm. She knocked on the window and he startled awake. The first words out of his mouth were not complaints, but a simple, steady question. "Where would you like to go?" His gaze remained lowered, as always, avoiding hers out of respect. Her voice shook, not from fear, but from resolve. "Take me to a mosque," she said softly. I want to learn. I want to understand the faith that gave you such strength." For the first time since she had met him, Shahid looked at her fully. His eyes held no judgment, only quiet surprise, and then a gentle smile. Without a word, he started the car. The city was still wet and gray, but inside her heart a new light had begun to flicker. During the ride, she told him everything. About her past, about Salim, about the pain that had consumed her and the bitterness that had hardened her heart. She confessed her mistakes openly, ashamed, yet relieved. Shahid listened silently, never interrupting, never reproaching. When she finished, he simply said, "Your past does not define you. What matters is the choice you make now." At the mosque, she stepped inside with trembling steps, her mind filled with questions, but her heart strangely at peace. That day, she embraced a new beginning, declaring her faith with sincerity. For her, it felt like a rebirth, a chance to bury the shadows of betrayal and walk toward a brighter future. Not long after, she and Shahid married. He kept his word, treating her with respect, honesty, and care. The journey that had begun with heartbreak in Gujarat ended with healing in Dubai. She had learned the hardest way that not all people were the same. Some deceive, but others uplift. In Shahid, she found not just a companion, but the proof that true integrity still existed in the world.